The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on surviving tomorrow's cyber attacks. We're going to be talking about resilience and putting cyber resilience in place cost effectively. My name is Alan Calder. I'm going to be your host this afternoon. I'm the founder and executive chairman of IT Governance. I wrote a book on what's now called cybersecurity with Steve Watkins about 15 or 20 years ago, which is just about to come out in its 7th edition. It deals with information security and the International Information Security Standard ISO 27001, and that book really is the starting point for IT governance, which has become a leading provider of risk and privacy management solutions to organizations of all sizes. And we operate very broadly in the governance, risk management and compliance markets, with some part of our business dealing with IT service management and governance generally, but the bulk of our activity is in what we now call cyber resilience. And as I'll be talking today, cyber resilience is the combination of security and the ability to recover from what might to other companies be mortally wounding blows. So data protection, privacy compliance, the GDPR, the EU-US Privacy Shield, California Citizens Privacy Act in the US, the whole growing range of privacy regulation, all of which is designed to encourage organizations to deal with the growing range of increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. And so we have a substantial penetration testing, PCI, cyber incident response, business continuity, and so on practice, all delivered through a range of training, published books and tools, a very substantial consultancy operation, and a software platform that supports all of that. And today we're going to be talking a bit about the cybersecurity landscape. We're going to be talking about the need for cyber resilience, what cyber resilience is, and we're going to be looking at what we call a cyber resilience framework, the 4-step approach to cyber resilience, and the importance of using standards to support a cyber resilience framework, and then a governance structure that boards can use to ensure the effectiveness of the approach to cyber resilience. You'll have seen that you're all on mute. That's to protect us from background noise and those kind of things. Come the end of the webinar, and I'll be talking for about 40 or 45 minutes. There will be a chance for us to go through questions and answers. And if, as I'm talking, you find that you do have questions to which you would like the answers, please do grab the question section in the GoToWebinar box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type questions into that box, and when we come to the Q&A session, then I'll try and pick up questions from there, which I will read out and I'll share with everybody in the audience. Copy of the slides should be available for you right now if you're struggling to access them online. Should be available also in the GoToWebinar link, and you should be able to download those. So let's talk about resilience. Resilience is, the dictionary definition is the ability to rapidly adapt, to protect assets, and to respond to risks. That's a resilience definition. Business resilience, therefore by extension, is the ability to rapidly adapt, protect business assets, and respond to business disruptions, maintaining continuous business delivery. That means that a business resilience system will include both continuity management and disaster recovery. Continuity management is the idea that you should be able to continue delivering services while you're recovering your core facilities to get back to business as usual. And it implies that you'll have some capability to mitigate loss, and that capability might be more than simply insurance. So combining the idea of resilience with the recognition that cyber threat is one of the most significant areas of challenge for today's organizations. You could define cyber resilience as the ability to repel cyber attacks while protecting critical business assets, rapidly adapting and responding to business disruptions, particularly cyber disruptions, and maintaining continuous business operations. So what's the difference, you might ask, between cyber resilience and cyber security? If we're cyber secure, is that not adequate? Well, cyber security, the technologies, processes, and controls that are designed to protect organizations and the individuals within them from cyber crime, to reduce the risk of cyber attacks. You could think of cybersecurity as a subsection of information security, but cybersecurity is fundamentally about defense. It's about keeping malware and bad actors out of the network, making sure that assets are defended and protected from attack, whatever the motivation of the attack. Whereas the reality is that however good your defenses are, you're still going to be breached. The nature of cyber malware and the evolving skills and competences of bad actors means that they tend to be ahead of most organizations, particularly where their attacks rely on human weaknesses and social engineering to breach your defenses. And that means cybersecurity, simply defending, is not enough. You also need to be able to soak up attacks, to respond to them, and ensure the organization keeps operating. So a broader approach than simple cybersecurity would be a resilient one, ensuring that cybersecurity and business continuity are managed together, that while defending against potential cyber attacks, you're also putting in place the processes that enable you to limit the severity of a successful attack and ensure the organization's survival. And if I just take a moment or so out to mention a company that a week or so went into Chapter 9 bankruptcy in America, the American Medical Collections Agency, the AMCA, a company of some 40 years old that never had a cyber attack, spent $1 million on improving its IT back in 2015, and then was breached in August last year. Didn't find the breach until round about March or April of this year, by when tens of thousands of medical records had been leaked. Its main customers, as soon as the news of the breach was announced, removed their business from AMCA. The cost of notifying the individuals who had their data breached, simply to meet the requirements of relevant US law, cost the founder of the business some couple of $1 million of his own money, which he had to put into the business to do that. And the cost of trying to pin down the cause of the breach, the costs of the 3 different cybersecurity and forensics companies they called in to help, and the ongoing loss of business meant that the business was simply unable to survive, and therefore went in June into liquidation. That's a company that was simply not resilient. Not only was it breached, it failed to spot the breach. It didn't have in place any of the capabilities that might have enabled it to have survived and got beyond the point of the breach and continued trading. No organization really wants to find itself in that position. And the reality is that it's not possible for any organization to appear strong, prepared, and competent if you've been the victim of a security breach. So to be able to say to your clients that you're an airways company, you protect personal data, and you're on the receiving end of a £183 million fine for inadequate security is a really difficult pitch to make to clients. To say that you're a hotel group that really protects personal data when one of your subsidiaries, both from before you purchased it and after, has had a breach that's run over 4 years, and you're the recipient of a nearly £100 million fine, is a very difficult thing to do. So pretending to be secure while you're also the victim of a security breach is really difficult. Your reputation doesn't cope very well, and 72% of the respondents to the Accenture State of Cyber Resilience survey agreed that a breach really is not what you need to help you look as though you're on top of what you're doing. The European Information and Security Agency, ENISA, produces an annual threat survey a threat landscape report. The most recent report looks at the range of threats that are facing organization, plots them on a scatter graph. You can see the top threats in 2017 and 2018. Malware continues to be the top attack, and then it shows you whether in 2017 and 2018 the volume of the attacks has gone up, gone sideways, or indeed in one or two cases gone down. But it's a publicly available piece of information. You can see that web-based attacks, web application, phishing, spam, denial of service, ransomware, and botnets are all continually on the increase. At best, they're going sideways. So spam is a time waster that hasn't got worse. It's gone down in the overall ranking, but its volume stayed much the same. You see phishing going up. You see web-based attacks going up. You see insider threats dropping. That's kind of encouraging. But the reality is all of the cyber-based threats are continuing to shift up the priority list and become more and more significant for organizations who are tackling their cybersecurity situation. The DCMS, the UK Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, and this is based on organizations volunteering information, suggests that in a number of areas the security has improved on account of cybersecurity breaches going down between 2018 and 2019. So that's kind of encouraging. For instance, within large firms, the indication is that 72% of them experienced a significant breach in 2018, whereas only 61% did this year. The fact that that's a decrease shouldn't take away from the fact that 61% of firms suffered a cybersecurity breach. That means when you look at the figures, even if they change slightly, that actually the reality is that most organizations continue to suffer cybersecurity breaches most of the time. The fact that micro and small firms are a small number of the total tends to mean that they're not very good at spotting breaches rather than that they're not being breached. Small firms tend not to have the capability to be aware of what's going on, and so their data is often quite inconsistent. But you see that charities, slightly more charities have suffered. The overall number of businesses breached has gone down a bit, but the reality is that most organizations have to be worrying about how they deal with cyber attacks all the time. The DCMS Cybersecurity Breaches Survey between 2018 and 2019, again, looking at some of the same threats and threat vectors as the ENISA survey, just counting them slightly differently and looking very specifically at the UK rather than across Europe as a whole, identifies in 2019 fraudulent emails as being one of the most critical areas. So phishing emails, emails that are designed CEO fraud, all of those kinds of things as being far and away the biggest threat vector. And when you think about that, you realize that it's very difficult to protect against those kinds of attacks just through deploying technology. When the second highest is people being impersonated through emails or online, actually what you've got to be doing is developing a cybersecurity framework which includes staff training. It includes making sure that the social aspect of your defenses is as well locked down and as resilient as the technological aspect of. What are the impacts of cybersecurity breaches? Well, some of them have been in the press over the last couple of days. So fines, GDPR fines, it's kind of the ICO after over a year of apparent inactivity has now said that it intends to levy the 2 biggest fines ever in the history of European privacy regulation, and in both cases the level of fine is only 1.5% of the organization's global turnover. So there is a lot of room for fines to go upward. There is the potential for those organizations who've been fined, if they don't get their act together, to suffer a higher fine next time. There's the challenge of class actions, legal actions and compensation. So the British Airways fine, running alongside that is the potential of a class action suit with those number of the 500,000 people whose data was compromised, lodging a claim worth, it's suggested, between £750 and £1,500 each. Whether the case is won or lost, the cost of defending it is going to be substantial. And on top of those externally imposed costs, organizations have all of the costs they go through forensically to identify what happened, the deployment of inevitably expensive teams to help recover, to get equipment back and working, legal counsel. You've almost certainly got you've broken laws, you've got breaches of your contracts, you've got a whole number of legal issues you've got to deal with as quickly as you possibly can. Loss of trust with customers. Time and again, you see a drop-off in business following substantial breaches. That can have an impact on the share price. Can have an impact on the ability to fund a deal. Yahoo, you might be aware, a acquisition deal fell through because of a long-running known breach, which the consequences of which couldn't be quantified. So cybersecurity and managing breaches and managing the impacts of breaches has become more than just an issue for a few companies. It's a corporate challenge. Yeah, you lose intellectual property, you can lose competitive advantage, you can lose the capability to operate. There are a number of cities, Florida comes to mind, where cities have been forced to shell out hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get a key to have ransomware released so that they can get their systems working again. You've had to send people home in the weeks it's taken to come to that conclusion and pay them while you're unable to operate. So the impacts of a successful cyber attack are very substantial and affect the business completely. And the drivers for those impacts, of course, there is regulation. There's the GDPR, which in the UK is the 2018 Data Protection Act, the NIST directive, which applies to operators of essential services and to operators of internet service platforms, internet service providers, putting in place requirements for them to have effective cyber resilience processes in operation, the DSP toolkit for organizations in or providing services to the NHS, and lots of sector-specific regulation. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, for instance, has specific requirements. Across the whole of the industrialized world, you see growing ranges of regulation around data protection, around protecting particular types and classes of data. And then there's contractual requirements. So PCI is a contractual requirement typically between a bank and its payment card gateway. You could have service level agreements with customers. The AMA went out of business because it was required by contracts with its medical customers to protect customer data, and the breach of that meant they could simply withdraw their custom. And of course, the need to be able to demonstrate through bids and tenders that you're a secure potential supplier. No organization wants to find its supply chain riven with insecure organizations. So the key issues in putting in place a cyber resilience framework, if you accept that for all of those reasons you need to be able to defend against but also soak up and recover from a cybersecurity breach, an effective cyber resilience program depends on coordinating and integrating the preparations for how you deal with a very wide range of possible attacks and disruptions. You've got to integrate the physical and digital domains. It's not much point having business continuity, for instance, being a program managed by one team and digital continuity being run by another, because increasingly a physical disruption also means a digital disruption, and also physical attackers can exploit digital disruptions. So, and vice versa. So the creation, the triggering of a fire alarm in a building will automatically set electronic doors to open. That creates an opportunity for physical attackers to get into areas they might not otherwise be able to access. You've got to integrate how you deal with physical and digital continuity. You need a strategy. You need to be clear about what good looks like. You need to be clear about what a minimum level of recovery looks like, what you're going to defend and what you won't defend. And that means you need to integrate all of your management systems in a way that ensures that you can achieve with appropriately trained people your objectives. You need a management authority to run cyber resilience. Just in the same way as you need to integrate digital and physical continuity, you need a single management authority that's charged with ensuring that the organization is able to be resilient in the broad range of imagined circumstances. And for each of those circumstances, you should be imagining, documenting, and preparing to defend, to have operations continue while recovering core systems for each of the potential attacks in each of the potential areas of vulnerability. And the requirement, the reason why you want to do that kind of training is because you don't want to be discovering that your plan doesn't work while you're in the middle of executing it. That's just about the worst time. A good working plan means that you need depth and breadth of staff awareness. You need functional competence. People need to be trained and rehearsed in what to do under certain circumstances. And those circumstances could include when something that's unexpected occurs, what to do then. So extensive individual and scenario testing to ensure that individuals and core managers can cope with a wide range of circumstances that might occur. Not much point, for instance, having a well thought out and put together emergency response team who drives everything if, when the event occurs, none of the emergency response team are currently available, either because they're sick or they're in a different country or their mobile communication devices have gone down. Then what happens? Who does the responsibility defer to? How does the team function? You've got to work through all of that range of issues if you're to be sure that when disaster strikes, you're going to be able to cope with it quickly and efficiently. So we've developed a cyber resilience framework. Cyber resilience as a framework recognizes that for many organizations, the starting point is that you don't have an awful lot in place around cybersecurity or around the ability to respond to attacks, and that developing a thoroughly resilience framework takes an extended period of time. It can be months, but typically it's a matter of years because processes have to be developed, refined, embedded inside the organization. Therefore, you can think of a cyber resilience framework as being the scaling of ever higher peaks of capability. The starting point for a cyber resilience framework is the basic core controls that you need, the protection against common cybersecurity attacks. And there are really only a small number of things that you need to do to protect against those core areas. We also think of that as being about the start of the manage and protect process, identify what could be a problem and begin managing and protecting it. The baseline, I'm going to look at each of these in a bit more detail. The baseline maturity level for cyber resilience is one where cybersecurity has become embedded in your operational processes because you've got a framework for managing cyber risk. Extending it would ensure that you bring key suppliers of services, the continuity of business operations into the ambit of what you're doing. So you've moved on from minimal resilience to something which enables you to survive under most circumstances. If you have a production line go down, how do you keep your key customers operational? If you have a key component supplier go down because they've had an attack which has disrupted their production line, how do you make sure your production line keeps operating? What does continuity look like? How do you handle communications through that, for instance? And then embedded, the most mature aspect of a cyber resilience framework is the point at which your cyber resilience has become integrated into your overall governance framework. It's part of how the business thinks, plans, operates right the way through the organization. So you can see the link between those four levels of maturity in each of the stages: manage and protect, identify and detect, respond and recover, and govern and assure, as being the elements which get to be more and more mature as you move through that maturity framework. So let me talk in a bit more detail about those 4 levels of maturity. The manage and protect. You need to deploy technologies, processes, and controls that will enable you to protect your systems, networks, and data from cyber attacks. And you need to start developing an early response system that enables you to identify risks to the organization through regular audits and testing. And that's both penetration testing and process audits. There are 2 sides of making sure that your system is going to cope as you intend it to. You need then to be able to respond and recover to identified issues. So first responders, incident response, how you start recovering systems quickly. To an extent, most organizations already have some of this capability because you'll be able to recover files and folders that people have deleted or lost through error. You want to be able to expand that into the capability to recover big chunks of the network when there's been a successful attack. So what do you do if someone clicks on a link in an email which downloads ransomware? How quickly do you detect that? Who does it get reported to inside the organization? How do you isolate the infected device or devices? How do you then respond to it, and how do you recover the element of the network which has been encrypted? The organizations which can't do that, of course, typically discover that they've been infected at the point when their entire network is locked down, and by then it's rather too late. And then governing and assuring is about how the board, the senior management of the organization can ensure that not only are they engaged with the way cyber resilience is operating across the organization, not only are key stakeholders aware, but they're able to continually inform themselves as to the effectiveness of the cyber resilience program. So you need to think about how are we going to do each of those things? How do we carry out each of the tasks in each of those 4 areas? So at the core level, the starting point really is to think about a framework called Cyber Essentials in the United Kingdom. It's a UK government created assurance scheme. It's based on the government's 10 steps to cybersecurity, and it has 5 key security controls. There are a number of cyber essentials certification bodies. We obviously are one, and the 5 key security controls are all around ensuring that the broad range, 80-odd% of internet-borne attacks are identified and neutralized. And remember that most organizations that are attacked weren't targeted, not specifically as an organization. What was targeted was a vulnerability or a weakness, and the discovery of that vulnerability meant that the attacker was able to exploit and take advantage. And so secure configuration, not surprisingly, is the first of the controls. Effective boundary firewalls and internet gateways, restricting and controlling access to the network, access control to key elements on the network, proper usernames, passwords, password hygiene, managing patches, ensuring that software on the network is patched regularly. The data release of patches is known by everybody, including criminals. The most prevalent software vulnerabilities are known, particularly by criminals. And so delaying a patch can leave a system open to attack for a lot longer than it should do. And the 5th is malware protection, is the antivirus, anti-malware software which the organization deploys to detect and deal with incoming malware, bearing in mind that most anti-malware protection will only pick up between 35 and 45% of known malware, and won't, unless it's updated regularly, necessarily pick up and respond to the most recently discovered malware. But those 5 key security controls will typically enable an organization to protect itself from 80% odd of the most common internet-borne attacks. So it's the core area. Cyber Essentials is just the basic thing any organization should do. It's cost effective. As I said, it was designed by the UK government. It addresses those 5 key controls. For a small company, typically CREST accredited certification, which is the best form of certification you can get because it's supported by an independent test, is for a small business typically around £300. It can go up for larger organizations, but it's still a very minimal cost for the quality of protection that an organization gets. It comes in two flavors. The second flavor is Cyber Essentials Plus, and Cyber Essentials Plus includes an on-site assessment of device security, and so it can identify the possibility of malware spreading inside a network and ensure that the organization is more secure. And we certainly, as a Cyber Essentials certification body, see a growing number of organizations shifting from Cyber Essentials to Cyber Essentials Plus as they recognize the improved value that they get out of the higher level of certification. So world leading, it's primarily UK driven, but we see increasing number of organizations from around the world taking on Cyber Essentials. You can handle it through a portal such as ours. It's a very straightforward core element of cyber resilience. Taking a step up to what we think of as being the baseline, the place where all organizations should as a minimum be, and that's deploying the International Information Security Standard ISO IEC 27001, which is a standard for an information security management system, and it covers organizations of all sizes. It's designed to deal with people, process, and technology, and it recognizes that it's the identification and assessment of risk by management which should drive the selection, deployment, and monitoring of a control framework. It's not unlike the PCI standard, which is a fixed set of controls that you have to have in place, or Cyber Essentials, which is a fixed set of controls. ISO 27001 enables organizations to make decisions about what's the most appropriate level of control, and enables organizations to link their control decisions to their own appetite for risk. It really is the baseline for cyber resilience. The reason why it's probably the fastest growing management standard in the world. In the UK, schools and colleges have just been told that they need to be getting on with implementing ISO 27001. The government's making some funding available for that, but that's all because of the recognition that that's the kind of baseline for any organization to be in terms of information security. And it's systematic. ISO 27001 is systematic. While Cyber Essentials deals with 5 technical controls, ISO 27001 deals with technical, process, and people controls as well. It's a key stepping stone on the path to cyber resilience. It does take into account the need to meet legal and regulatory compliance requirements, as well as simply to reduce cyber exposure. It builds further resilience as you integrate it with other standards and begin looking at governance. There's a requirement in ISO 27001 for management to regularly review the organization's cybersecurity, and that's a good step towards the recognition that accountability is a key part of effective cybersecurity. The third level, what we call extended, is stepping on beyond simply how do we deal with, how do we manage attacks, to thinking about continuity. Business continuity, there's an international standard, ISO 23, there's an international standard, the vocabulary for which is set out in ISO 23000, and defines business continuity as the capability of an organization to continue delivering its products or services at acceptable levels following a disruptive incident. So it's saying you have a disruption, your business shouldn't stop. You will have a minimum level of performance to which the organization within a minimum period of time will return. It will continue operating at that while it recovers all the rest of its systems. Disaster recovery is the ability of the organization to recover its core systems following a disruption. So continuity and recovery should happen alongside one another. It's no good if you have a really good disaster recovery plan, but it takes 5 days to fully implement and you lose the ability to deliver services for 5 days. Unless, of course, your customers don't need you to deliver services for 5 days. If they do, your continuity program should ensure that you're able to do that in a way that works for customers. Incident response is the preferably pre-planned approach to responding to an incident, how to deal with the incident as soon as it's discovered, how to deal with the aftermath, how to limit damage and reduce recovery time and costs. So in an extended maturity organization, business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response will all be integrated components of what the organization is doing, and how it integrates those will be driven by its assessment of its business risks. Traditionally, business continuity and disaster recovery have been built on the idea that the risks it's dealing with will be high impact but low likelihood. So it's a flood or a terrorist attack or a pandemic or extreme weather conditions, those traditionally high impact, low likelihood events. Although of course climate change means that extreme weather conditions is now high impact and increasingly high likelihood. Terrorist attacks in some parts of the world is high impact, high likelihood. And so your assessment of how a risk is dealt with in a traditional business continuity framework, that should be changing in any case. But the reality for businesses now is that the blend between physical attacks and digital attacks, the link between a disruptive, low likelihood, high impact external events and disruption of systems is such that organizations have to be integrating business continuity management system and their information security management system. If, for instance, you have a data center safely in a different part of the world and it's attacked by terrorists, you could lose a substantial capability of the organization to operate. So how do you deal with that should be part of the planning for your cyber resilience framework. So ICT, information and communications technology continuity, there is an international standard for that, ISO 27031. It's written to fit with the business continuity standard, which is ISO 22301. There's a standard for incident response, ISO 27035. What these standards are saying is that there are ways in which you can draw on recognized best practice. Standards are written so that they will integrate with other standards. It's very easy to build a management system in your baseline security model on ISO 27001 and then extend it by adding in an incident response system built around 27035, a continuity system built around 27031, and so on. And as I said, the 22301 International Business Continuity Standard extends further than that to take into account the traditional business risks covered by business continuity. So the integration of business continuity with ISO 22301 enables an organization on a much more extended basis to build resilience into its operations. And that kind of an approach means that the systematic approach to, or systematic assessment of risks to the business across a broad range of threat vectors, the assessment of potential impacts should enable much more informed decisions to be made about where the organization invests in business continuity improvement, in what cost-effective resilience should look like, and in designing resilient work practices to support business goals, to support the delivery of key products and services through disruption the organization has. And the benefits of that, of course, are when you have a disruption, clients go, actually, wow, they coped. Your commitment to service continuity, the good marketing opportunities when you're going after business, say, we've had several breaches, but our systems are so resilient that we've coped. We never lost a day. We never lost a production outcome. All of those are things that enable you to compete effectively with less well-prepared organizations. The key bit of thinking in the typical organization is the link between an incident and business continuity plan. So the judgment, the triage is, we've had an incident, there is some ransom we're sitting in an email attachment which somebody's clicked on inside the organization, at what point does that security incident get escalated into the rolling out of the business continuity plan? At what point do we deploy which resources? Do we wait until the whole network is encrypted and we can't do work? Is there a point at which we operate before that? Where do we invoke our business continuity plan? And that's why thinking about cyber incident response means, as much as anything, thinking about how that whole process works. So you start with, and CREST, which is the accreditation body for cyber incident response, cyber essentials, and so on, identifies that preparation is the starting point. What's critical assets? What are the key threats? What are the realistic scenarios in which they might operate? What are the implications? And you test these through rehearsals on people, processes, technology, and information of each of those threats. What controls can we put in place to reduce the likelihood or impact of any one of those? And what's our overall state of readiness in terms of incident response? We then need to be able to respond. Identifying incidents, knowing what the objective is in each of those incidents, preferably with each of them being properly planned, taking action to recover systems and connectivity, knowing that that will work not just because you've tested it, but because you've done it. And so having a wash-up after an incident, investigating it more completely, knowing whether you need to report it to authorities, and if personal data is concerned, you almost certainly do. How you handle communications with stakeholders, with staff, with those people whose data has been affected, and then the changing and updating of processes and controls. All of those are important parts of effective follow-up to a really strong and robust cyber incident response process. Many organizations simply outsource this because keeping this effective and operational is difficult, and incidents don't happen every day, which means it can be an expensive overhead to maintain, but you've got to be able to respond effectively. Then there's the highest level, the top of the maturity mountain, what we call embedded cyber resilience, and that's really about creating, evolving, growing your cyber resilience framework to the point where the board is completely embedded in the process. So the board is able to set objectives around cybersecurity, resilience, capability in the context of an understanding of the risks which it as an organization has to face, ranging from attacks by nation states all the way through to simple mass low-level cyber crime. The understanding of stakeholder requirements, the board is then able to effectively give direction to the cybersecurity management team on what needs to be done, the objectives to be achieved, to evaluate proposals for how that's done, and then to monitor the performance and conformance with those objectives and with relevant laws of the IT management. And when the board is thoroughly embedded in the organization, then you're beginning to get to the point where the organization is genuinely resilient and able to handle as an organization, rather than just as different disparate elements, the whole range of challenges that come with a cyber breach. And cyber resilience at one level, therefore, really means for most organizations redefining how you might manage cyber risk. Increasingly, we find that organizations looking at the vast range of different attacks and the range of skills and competences they need to have in-house to enable them to deal with cyber attacks, to be genuinely cyber resilient, think increasingly of outsourcing components of how they deal with it, or to look at another way, to be bringing the skills in to the organization on in-source basis, where you have access to a team of capable professionals, but not on a full-time salary basis. You're able to pay for access to competence that can own and drive a cybersecurity framework for you on a cost model that's appropriate for the organization. So we call that cybersecurity as a service, where we as a business handle our clients' cybersecurity that enables them to focus on their business while we focus on what we know best, which is how to identify and limit the impact of cyber risk on an organization, enabling the organization to move on to be cyber secure and resilient. And the starting point for that typically is a cyber health check, to take a look at the organization's risk exposure, talk very clearly about risk exposure rather than just exposure, because the only exposure that's important are the ones that you care about. All organizations have exposures which you're prepared to live with because it's an important part of your business model. You have a risk appetite, you're prepared to take some risks, but not all. And so a health check, a cyber health check, should identify where you have exposures, link those to your risk appetite and the decisions you've made about risk, and therefore identify what controls you have in place and how you might go about dealing with those attacks in a way that is appropriate for you as an organization. Quite a lot of how that operates is then dealt with on our Cyber Comply platform, which is an independent platform that organizations can use to track and manage the range of issues that they have to deal with. So the range of challenges is quite substantial. The number of ways that you can deal with it is quite straightforward. You can develop the competences in-house, you can in-source them through cybersecurity as a service. In any one of those areas, there are practical routes forward for you as an organization. Apologies. So we're having a slight cyber resilience challenge here. Excuse me while we just recover our system. And the organization can therefore draw on existing IT governance services, speak to our cyber resilience experts, free green paper you can access from our website, call us, email us, and there's a growing range of webinars that you can access that will provide information and guidance on how to tackle this key issue. And really just to finish up, and I'll turn to questions if there are any shortly, really just to finish up, as you look around you and the range of organizations who've reported suffering cyber attacks, what you see is a large number of organizations who suffered very substantial cyber attacks because they did adopt the approach that the AMCA did, which is we've never had a serious attack. We would have noticed if we did, therefore we don't need to do anything different than we are doing now. The reality is that cyber criminals love those kinds of organizations because they know that once they get inside your defenses, they have quite a long time in there before anybody will discover them. They'll get an awful lot of data out. They'll be able to sell it. They will enjoy all that, and they don't really care what happens to you. So as a business, as a management, cyber resilience is about how you can ensure that that doesn't happen to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of what I was planning to say. If there are any questions, if you would just type them, probably right now the fastest route is if you put them into the chat function in the GoToWebinar screen, and I'll pick up and handle any questions that there are in the chat function as and when they ask. The right-hand side of the screen, there's a chat function. Type a message in there. I'll pick it up and respond to it. And it kind of looks as though, therefore, I've answered all your questions as I've gone. So I'd like to thank you all for being on the webinar today. I hope you found it useful. As I said, the slides are available there in the GoToWebinar panel. Please do feel free to download them. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us today, and good luck in your cyber resilience endeavors.